Without further ado, I want to introduce you to today's speaker, Diana Hendrickson. Born in Cusco, Peru, Diana Hendrickson Cayañupo, grew up between Chinchero and Cusco and then moved to the United States for 6 years to pursue higher education, graduating from the University of Wisconsin at River Falls with a degree in International Studies and Spanish. After graduation, Diana returned to Peru to work with the Centro de Textiles Tradicionales de Cusco in 2015. She joined the Board of Trustees in 2018, and we are so grateful to have her here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that introduction. It's lovely to be here, and I hope everybody's ready to hear and learn a little bit about the history of knitting and textiles in Peru. So thank you so much for that. And Maddie, I'll ask to share the PowerPoint so we can start. So as Andrew mentioned, I am part of the Centro de Textiles Tradicionales del Cusco, located in Cusco. So we are a nonprofit organization that was established in 1996. One of our founders is the very famous Nilda Cayañaupa, and we are specialized in the revitalization and awareness of ancestral textile practices in Cusco and Peru. We do so through the development of products and projects that will facilitate the sustainability of traditional weaving practices in the Cusco region, and we promote the development of weaving communities and associations in Cusco. We work with and support about 10 weaving associations throughout the Cusco region. The closest one to the city of Cusco, to give you an idea, is Chinchero, which is about half an hour away by car. But the furthest one association that we support is about 6 to 8 hours away from Cusco. And each weaving association was selected to work with us because they preserve very ancient and unique textile techniques, including knitting, in the highlands of Cusco. So to give you a little more context about where these wonderful weavers and knitters live, their cultural surroundings, and the reality of their life and the projects that they participate with us at CTTC, I'll ask Maddie to please share the first video where you'll learn a little bit more about us. Thank you, Maddie, and I hope everybody enjoyed that little bit of video presentation from CTTC. So we'll get back to the PowerPoint to continue with the presentation. But knitting has become an important part of our tradition in textile practices and also in our livelihood and living culture. So to begin with everything, I'd like to give you a little history of how that happened and where the knitting traditions and techniques came from. Because knitting is not actually native to Peru nor Cusco. It actually is thought that it came with the Spanish around the 16th century. However, the technique is not actually Spanish either. It is a Portuguese style that originated in the Middle East. We're not sure about the exact time where it came to Europe, but the Portuguese adapted this style and created different essences to make it a little more versatile and efficient. And then that was taught to the Spanish or adopted by the Spanish, and it came during the 16th century when Spanish came to Peru for the conquest of the Incas in the territory. And then the weavers adopted that technique and made modifications to make it their own. So Maddie, if we could go to the next slide, please. There are some varieties between the Portuguese original style, which is still practiced today, and the Peruvian style. So we'll go a little more in depth about what that looks like so that we understand its roots and why it became this way. Both the Portuguese and the Peruvian style developed certain assets to create efficiency. The main one was similar to what you can see on the right of the screen, is pulling the thread around the neck, and that stabilizes the thread and creates better tension, easier to manipulate with only the hands and minimal use of the hands. However, with the Portuguese style, they developed something that is called the kneading pin. So the kneading pin can be used together with the thread around the neck or just by itself in the Portuguese style. But essentially, it provides a little more structure and easier manipulation of the thread. In Peru, a knitting pin was not developed. Using the neck to manipulate the tension of the thread is still what is most common. And then you use the hands, either the left or the right, depending on if you're lefty or right-handed. You will use your finger or a thumb to manipulate the thread and control the tension. While in the Portuguese today, they still use a knitting pin mostly, but sometimes you'll still see the thread around their neck in combination of the knitting pin to control the tension instead of the hands. Either way of the uses was created to be able to have quick and efficient creation of the stitches and to have better control of the tension while doing so. So another difference is that in Western styles, they will use the left hand to control the tension with the hand and wrap the thread around the fingers, and then use the needle to create the stitches with the left. So you'll go mostly from left to right. While in the Andes, it was adopted in the opposite way. You will wrap the thread around your left finger, meaning that you go from right to left to start with, and you'll use your dominant hand in most cases to be able to create the stitches. Kind of known as reverse knitting. Another thing is that with this technique, it's easier to do a purling stitch, and that is what is used in most cases, most of the time, improving knitting, rather than the typical knitting stitch is a purling stitch. So a lot of the times where I'll referring to the purling stitch and that process. The Peruvian knitters adopted this technique because it allows them to also create tighter stitches. In Peruvian chullos and knitting, you can create from 18 stitches and even more per inch, creating very tight and various designs and color work. It reduces hand strain, meaning that they don't get as tired with the wrist and use of their hands and arms. And it allows them to be very fast. Some communities like Chinchero that have very tight stitches and very intricate designs can take up to months to create one of their beautiful chullos. But there are other communities like Huacatinco that will concentrate on like looser stitches, but as well with very intricate color work and designs. And there's such masters as dominating this technique that they can create a chullo even in one day sometimes when they're really good at it. So while the Portuguese technique with the pin was developed especially for comfort to create even stitches and tightness, it was also developed for long sessions of knitting. But because of the history and the past with weavers in Peru, it was mainly focused on tightness, the control of the colors, and to be efficient in the creation of very intricate designs. So if we can move to the next slide, we'll see why it was focused on that, because there's also an influence from our ancestral history of why Peruvians, Cusqueñans, especially in the highlands, became most famous and also the masters of the knitting techniques. And that was because even though knitting itself was brought by the Spanish around the 16th century, we have thousands of years of experience with very similar techniques. So the first example of something similar to knitting was found 5,000 years ago in a pre-Columbian culture in Peru called Caral. Caral was focused on the northern side coast of the country, a little north to Lima in geography today, but it was really perfectioned by a technique that is called cross-stitch looping, and that was developed by the cultures Nazca and Paracas that were located in the central coast section of Peru, exactly where Lima is and a little bit to the south. So this technique was focused on creating tubular three-dimensional textiles that would allow them to create intricate patterns, designs, color combinations with the use of fine needles. Today, as we work with our latest projects at CTTC, our revitalization projects, this is one of the techniques, or this both are techniques that we're revitalizing because they were believed to be extinct or no longer practiced anywhere in the world, really. So we're working on bringing them back to life so that the practices continue, they don't get lost for the future. And then as we move through the years, Paracas and Wari had contact with a different culture that is called Wari. Wari was actually developed all around the country, but it was focused in the central Andes, in Cusco, Puno, and Ayacucho is where it's found today in like today's geography. And that is why also Cusco, Puno, and Ayacucho are known as where the mastery of knitting is found today. In both cases, they use needles, either sewing needles that in the past were found from fish spines or like small cactus spines, while in the knotting technique from the Wari culture, they use longer, wider needles, and they were also found as cactus spines. Now those things are very hard to find and very hard to use in everyday life. So nowadays you see regular wooden or metal needles that are used for both techniques as we work in the revitalization of them. But both of those techniques were focused on color combination and the intricacy of the design. Those cultures didn't have a written communication, so textiles were extremely important to communicate both their religious beliefs, their culture beliefs, and their everyday lives and histories. They also had something that is called the fear of the emptiness, which pretty much meant that if you had a lot of empty spaces or insignificant spaces, you allowed for bad energies or bad entities to enter your life in your textile. That's why when you see pre-Columbian textiles from Peru, they're very colorful, very vibrant, and full of designs, colors, patterns, interpretations of their own beliefs. So that also carries over into our knitting, modern knitting techniques and what we find today in knitting. With the intricate designs and the use of multiple colors. So if we move to the next slide, please. Okay. So if we move to the next slide, we'll go a little more in depth about the technique and the uses. For knitting in Peru nowadays, we use 5 needles. 4 of those needles are placed with the same amount of stitches, and they stay in place to hold the work, the stitches, as the weaver or the knitter moves along creating new stitches. So the fifth needle that is loose and empty is the one that gets inserted into this stitch and then creates more stitches. And as one of the four needles frees up, then that becomes your fifth needle to create the next row. It's also known in Peru that we work in a seamless knitting in the round technique. That means that because we use a double-edged needle, you can start at either side creating a tubular kind of technique, and that allows us to create one large piece or one chullo piece without any seams in it. Like I said before, you usually start from the right to left as opposed to the Western style, which is left to right. But because of the intricate color work and multiple colors that we use, a lot of the threads get tangled and twisted about. So it is very common for weavers to change directions as they change colors to prevent the threads from being too tangled. But of course, with everything, if the threads get tangled, the knitter will just stop, detangle everything, and then continue the work. Some other thing that is very different in the Peruvian knitting and the needles is, as you can see on the picture on the right, the point of the needle is actually kind of like a hook, similar to a crochet hook. They've developed that throughout the years to be able to make it easier to grasp the threads as they go and don't lose a stitch. Now, throughout the years, CTTC has been trying to find needles that were designed or created in this way to kind of help along the way of the weavers, but we haven't been successful, neither in abroad or in Peru. So these needles and the pointed like crochet hooks that you see in the images are actually created by the weavers themselves. So we nowadays find the knitting needles anywhere in the markets. They'll take them home and then they'll take a rock or anything heavy and start hitting the edge to create that hook. And then they'll take a file similar to a nail file, but a file that is designed for metal, and then they take a file and create that edge to create the hook. So everything, because of the area, the surrounding area, the needs that they've created throughout the time in their own practices, have been home adaptations to what they need and how to make everything more efficient. This technique and the uses of these needles also allows for very fluid movement, so that a weaver can be concentrating in knitting for many hours and move fast. Especially Huacatinco knitters, for example, that are very famous for their chullos. They're the ones that create the most famous chullos. We'll move to the next slide, please. Okay. Now that we go into color and threads, in Peru, a lot of the techniques in most of the weaving associations that we work with either 2 colors or 3 colors at the time for the color works. And I'll explain a little bit of what that means. So as you see in the picture on the left, that is an example of the very intricate and tight knitting from Chinchero. You can see very clearly the 3 colors. So in the case of Chinchero, they'll wrap the 3 colors around their neck, and they'll use only those 3 colors, maybe sometimes adding other ones. But the threads will be twisted within each other to create the knot and to continue weaving with them. So how that happens, or to twist the threads, is that the color that is going to be thrown or the color that is going to be purled in the picture is red. First, you'll take both the 2 other colors and twist them or switch them within themselves. So you'll take them and do this motion with your fingers and cross them around, and then above each other. And then the color that is going to be worked on then goes in the center, and using your thumbs, you'll put it above the needle, the 5th needle, and that creates the purling stitch. And then you repeat that as you go and as you want to switch the colors. So that allows the color switch, and that allows to work with 2 or 3 colors at the same time. However, some other weaving associations like Pitumarca, Huacatinco, or Chahuaytiri will use something a little different. That is that they will use 2 or 3 colors at the same time, but they will carry multiple colors on the back. That is because most of the weaving associations will also have a difference between like Western styles or Portuguese style weaving, which is will work on the back end, on the back of face of the chullo or whatever we're needing instead of the front. That allows for easier color switch. And in their techniques, they will have, like you can see on the left, many bunches of different multiple colors that they'll use for their designs. So they'll just let them carry and hang on the back. And then as they need the color, they'll pull it up and do the same motion with the twisting and then pulling over the needle to create the stitch. Just keep in mind that to prevent puckering, they'll leave those colors pretty much loose and hanging there. But that allows for them to have chullos with many colors. Some chullos I've seen with 20-25 colors, but the essence of their technique is just using 2 or 3 colors and then having the bunches hanging in the locations where they need it. And then again, because you're using so many colors, as you move through each row, remember that you have the 4 needles, so as you move through each row, and you create the color patterns, when there is a color switch in the main plane field, they'll switch directions. So typically they'll start from right to left. And then once they want to create a color switch, they'll change from left to right to detangle the threads in the process and try to keep everything organized. Now, of course, with changing sizes and everything, usually we knitters in Peru for chullo making, they'll start at the widest point and then they'll go lower and taking stitches out if necessary. So to bring it smaller, they'll just bind off one of the stitches, usually in the rows in between designs, so they're not affecting their count of stitches for a design. But in the case that they're making a maqueto, which is a covering for the arms, then they'll increase a stitch or the sizes by picking up a stitch from the previous row, usually also between the rows that are between the designs, so not to affect the original design. And then I know this is a lot of information and it can be a little daunting to see it just from images. So I'll ask Mari to share a little video of the knitting in the Andes.
Oops.
Thank you so much, Maddie, for sharing the video. Now we'll get into a little more cultural information about the chullos. So chullos have become a staple and a very important representation of our culture and the meanings between our lives, where we come from, where we're from, but they're typically used only by men. Both children, young adults, and older adults, but males will use chullos. Women, when they're little girls and young girls, they sometimes will use chullos, but um, but as they go older and they grow into women, they'll start using monteras, which are the traditional hats that we'll use. So chullos are representations of men. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Awesome. So here in this picture, you can see, you can have a little sense of the variety of chullos and hats the traditional hats that we have in the Cusco region. Each weaving association, if each really any community across the Cusco region will have their own specific chullo. Within the chullo, you'll find a lot of designs, intricate work, embellishments that can be tails, pom-poms, tassels, beaded work, curpos, a lot of decorations with like plastic buttons and other things. So that depends on their own decision and their own traditions of what they want to do. However, when you look at a chullo, it can tell you everything about that person. It can tell you if they're a young male that is just learning how to knit, or if the chullo was knitted by their mother. It will also tell you their status, both within their community, if they hold a position of status and they have some sort of power or level in their community, but it will also tell you if that man is single, married, or ready to be married. In the Andes, both men and women knit. However, women tend to knit for their families, children, their husbands, and also for their sale of their textiles, so the sale of their chullos at the end. But men are known as the masters of the chullo making and the knitting. They are well known for making extremely intricate and decorated textiles, and they will only weave mostly for their sons and themselves. And there is a little tradition here, which is sometimes still practiced in the weaving associations. However, you don't hear much of it in the cities, which is similar to women, that to be married, you need to be a good cook, you need to be a good weaver. For males, is that you need to be a good knitter. If you are able as a man to knit a very intricate, well decorated and embellished chullo, then you're ready to be married. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So since you have to be very intricate and it's kind of a contest between men to get to those points, everything that you decorate your chullo with also has a meaning. A big part of it are the motifs or the designs within the chullo itself. Like I mentioned before, the pre-Columbian cultures and up to the Spanish, so even the Incas, didn't have a written language. So textiles, both knitted or or whether it was knotted or looping technique or anything, served kind of as a written language. It was the opportunity and the area where everybody could express their history, their family, the animals, their practices, their religious beliefs, and everything. So you can find everything from, like on the left, you'll see llamas. On the top and on the bottom in the image on the left, you can see something that looks like rats, but those are actually guinea pigs. You see butterflies, so you see a lot of animal motifs. Everything that they see, even nowadays with the modernization, people have pets like dogs and cats and guinea pigs and hamsters, things like that. So nowadays you'll also see images of cats and dogs and their everyday animals and chickens within their knitted pieces in chullos as well, because it's telling their everyday stories. In some weaving associations like Patabamba and Acopia, they'll actually have designs where they'll show women and men and children, and those are actually very unique. So whenever you see people, you know that it's from that area of the Cusco region. So they'll tell the stories with dances, with themselves, with their outfits and colors, but you also see the motifs of things like rivers and mountains that you'll see in the next slide a little better. Okay, so here, for example, on the picture on the right, you see the peaks of mountains that surrounds the area. This specific picture is from Accha Alta, and that is one of the weaving associations at the highest level elevation that we work with. And they are in an area where the peaks and the mountains are very majestic. So, of course, most of their designs will be the mountains and the trails around them, but also their crops. So, those diamond-shaped designs at the bottom are most likely their crops or water sources in the middle. But some other communities like Pitumarca, where they're in very fertile lands and their crops are flourishing, they'll see their crops. So like wheat and flour and corn is represented within their motifs and the designs, as well as little birds that live within the flowers of their crops. If we can move to the next slide, please. So as important as the motifs are, also the embellishments tell a different story. Chullos are famously known for its ear flops or earpieces. However, as you saw in in the other picture, the ear flops and their decorations can vary from community to community and also depending on what you're trying to express. Some ear flops will be small, some will be large, some will have large pom-poms and very embellished pom-poms like on the left, but some of them will have tassels, woven tassels added at the end, as well as other buttons that are added at the end. In the case of the picture on the left, that you see the intricate beaded work, and I have another example here that maybe you can see a little closer with the beaded work. The beaded work is actually done during the kneading process. It's not it's not added after, it's added during. While the tassels, the woven tassels and the buttons are added after the kneading is complete. So the embellishments are also a big part of what they represent. In the past, um, all knitting was done with alpaca or wool that was hand spun. But nowadays, sometimes use alpaca that has been machine spun to make it softer. And those adoptions were made because of tourism and the sale of the textiles and the market that has been created for them and gives them a sustainable income throughout the time. So a lot of the adjustments, sometimes simplifications or modifications, are done due to the current necessities that the weavers will have. If we can move to the next slide, please. There are other techniques and other embellishments that require some more delicate practices, not just the beaded work, but on the left, you'll see a picture of a unique technique that is called curpos. Curpos happens in Accha Alta, and it's also added during the kneading process. So what you do is as you knead, when you're creating the stitch, you finalize the stitch, and then you tie many knots around your thumb and add it to the stitch before securing it and moving to the next one. So all the designs, for example, in this community in Accha Alta are created with the corpus technique, which is a type of embellishment within just plain purling technique. So a lot of those can be very complex, depending on what they want to represent and the importance within the weaving association. Other places like Sayek and Pitumarca will have long tails or tubular designs within the kneading process. And for example, for them, the longer the tail, then usually the more intricate and more prepared for marriage you are. And then you ended with pom-poms or tassels. So a lot of the embellishments can be during, after, but they usually have a significance of why they're being added to the cultural practice of knitting. If we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. Well, with that, I don't want to take too much time since we have some Q&As, but I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to learn a little more about kneading in the Andes of Cusco, and how we keep the cultural practices alive.